can't believe the day has come. Node runs on Next now. Yes, literally. Like the Node.js website is built entirely on top of Next and even runs on Vercel. I had heard about this project for a while. I know it's been a deep in the works project. And yeah, it's beautiful. It's not that simple though. Whenever you rewrite something this big, it's important to hit all the details and make sure people's expectations are met. And I think they did a great job with it. The code base for this is nuts. The quality of the code is genuinely really impressive. They're using lots of cool modern tools and technologies. The accessibility is through the roof. But I want to break it down because this is honestly one of the best examples of an open source Next.js code base to reference when you're trying to do things correctly. I'm going to start with some comments from the team, and then we're going to go dig straight into the code. So make sure you stick around if you want to see the code itself. This is a set of tweets from Claudio, who is self-admittedly new to Twitter, and as such, replied all of their things to the main tweet instead of making a thread. I even told them right when they posted it, they should have reposted it, and they didn't. We spent 3 years developing the new Node.js website. Some might ask why it took so long. The website design and content are relatively simple, but the true story unveils here. We always felt that the current Node site needed more harmony. It was not easy to navigate, it was not friendly, and it was not end user or consumer first. We needed something that could easily allow you to get started for your platform. Content-wise, we made a tremendous long effort to prioritizing a restructure of pretty much every section. We took lengthy discussions on what and where content should be placed. We also realized we needed a project that used relatively future-proof technologies and that would allow outstanding developer experience. Much effort was put into every technical decision behind the Node website. After all, we wanted to ensure that both newcomers and existing long-term contributors felt confident in navigating the codebase. We also focused a lot on documentation and documenting every piece of tech used on the website. This is actually exciting. We'll be sure to dig through the collaboration guide in a sec. We wanted to make the experience of getting started and getting your environment ready and being able to immediately make contributions. A lot of effort was put into documentation, CI/CD, and tooling to make that possible. I think you missed a word in here. The goal was to make it really nice to start immediately, which is a noble and important goal. Accessibility and internationalization were critical priorities for the redesign of our website and for the tech stack. This bit in particular, I have regularly been surprised by how few good examples there are of big open source projects that handle specifically internationalization correctly, but also accessibility too. They also prioritize the experience of non-technical people making contributions because things like translations and enabling their diverse communities were important to them. They want to make sure Node is reachable to everyone. This is a very important goal, and I think it's a big part of why a lot of technologies have succeeded. Like Vue, for example, was way better at building international communities and documenting their behaviors in many languages compared to something like React that did not do as good of a job about that early, and as such, has been much more dominant in Western and English-speaking places. Node does not want to fall down that trap, and they're going out of their way to make sure everything's accessible everywhere. In the end, it took them 3 years. Yes, 3 years. But 3 years of a lot of back and forth, careful decision-making, and excellent collaboration with many incredible people. I'm really proud of what we achieved. In the end, this is just a static website, right? However, the collaboration process and the journey itself are priceless. And I genuinely believe that what I learned from this project is truly relevant to newcomers and veterans. There's a lot to learn from here, a lot to inspire. Lastly, I'm thankful to all the sponsors, contributors, and the Node community for the continued feedback and for allowing us to serve the community again. We made this website for you. Happy programming and enjoy Node.js. Great start. I want to dig in though, because as cool as the what and the why are, I need to see the how. Also, first thing that stands out, npx turbo serve. They're using Turbo. This is a mono repo. How cool is it? There's this big of a mono repo showcasing best practices for Node itself. Talk's cheap. Let's clone. My least favorite thing so far by a lot. Y'all know how I feel about Storybook, but that's not what we're here for. npm CI. Okay, they're using npm. Lame. I get it. I understand. I'm too used to Bun and pnpm making these things super fast, but I get it. Anyways, now we can run Turbo in this project, and that results in the web app being hosted. So theoretically, if I go to localhost 3000, it starts compiling for my locale, and now we have it. Do you know how rare it is for a giant project like that to make it that easy to just spin up? You can see the /en on the URL because it's handling all the localization. Let's start by digging into that because I'm actually really curious. Actually, I have to walk something back. This isn't a traditional Turbo repo. This isn't a mono repo. This isn't a mono repo at all. They've separated their inputs and their outputs so you can cache things independently, but they're just using Turbo as a step to make things build faster, not as a necessary piece for a bunch of packages. Very interesting. I was very surprised to see pages on the root. Also app. Interesting that they have pages as well as app router. Pages en, has their blog, their about, a lot of other things. Oh, that makes sense. Everything that's markdown is still in Pages directory. That makes sense. The markdown bundling in Pages router is definitely still the best way to go. I have not seen as happy of a markdown bundling story on app router yet. I get why they stayed with that for that. So this is for the blog content primarily, whereas the actual site is all generated through app. They even have a robots TS. All the best practices, I'm telling you guys. It allows us to generate a robots text file dynamically based on the needs of the Node.js website. They allow these things, they disallow these things. It's cool that they export this as part of Next. Again, they're doing all these things correctly. They even have a sitemap, which I've seen a lot of people not include, and a small number of people include but incorrectly. So having a good example of a sitemap that is being used by one of the most important sites in the whole JavaScript ecosystem, huge. I want to learn more about how they're handling the locales. Const locale equals await get locale. Locale provider. What package is this from? At providers locale. Oh, they're just using Next internationalization. Okay. I was curious if they were doing something more crazy here, and they're not. This is the thing most Next devs would use if they were doing internationalization, which is good to see. They're not doing something crazy here. It includes the messages as well as the time zone in order to have the context that is needed to render things correctly. For those who are curious how I go from the web page to a code file on a new project, I'll usually grab some unique text like open-source, search for that, and look at that. Pages, en, index.mdx. Cool. Here we have section with badge. Node is a free open source cross-platform JS runtime. Here's the download button, small, all that stuff. Again, with an index.mdx, you get to write JSX inside of your markdown, which is cool. My one concern is I don't actually see where a lot of these imports are coming from, which means that they have like globals being applied to their markdown renderer, which just isn't the most visibly easy to find thing, but it's also probably the most maintainable with the way that they're building things. Is that a component that they wrote just to pass code snippets to? That's actually really cool if it's that simple. JS display name is create an HTTP server. So they just write these snippets of code here, and it appears correctly in the UI. I'm sure they're using Shiki. Actually, I remember them saying they were using Shiki 2/. So let's try something. Let's make this TypeScript instead. It still works. Let's try a test type equals sure. Oh, cool. It worked. Check that out, guys. Seemed worse than it was at the time. Anyways, won't read too much into that, and I hope y'all don't either. I'll change that back to JS so there's no more changes. It is cool that almost all the content is just markdown, and that all of it is loaded through app router, even though the content is pages router. So these things are just being used as effectively wrappers, and also for generating robots, text, sitemaps, and all of those types of things. Oh, here's their RSS endpoint too. Cool that they included that. And that again, like all of these best practices that are annoying to get right, like here is how you add an RSS map to your blog that you wrote in Next. Is just there. And also, really cool thing, they enforce that this route is static. So when a new blog post is published, you get a new static build, but the response of calling this route will always be generated like RSS that they've already created, which is really cool that they don't have to run a server on every request. This is just handled on build because the site is static. I want to dig into their collaboration guide before I go too much deeper though. Let's take a look. The Node site is built upon React and Next respectively, the UI rendering engine in the framework that builds the website. The website also uses several other open source libraries, not limited to the ones listed below. I love to capitalize the website. Styling is done with PostCSS and CSS modules. They use a combination of PostCSS plugins to create a SaaS-like environment. We recommend reading the docs of our plugins in case of doubt. PostCSS mixins, import, simple variables, etc. Tailwind is used as their CSS framework in the foundation of their design system. Interesting. I actually didn't check for that, and I did not expect that either. Cool to see. Hero Icons is an SVG icon library used within our codebase. I actually was playing with Hero Icons yesterday. It's great. It's an open source set of icons created by the Tailwind guys. That is awesome. You just go here. You can copy it directly as an SVG or JSX. I think there's a package you can install that includes them all too. But honestly, I usually just show up here, I copy the JSX, I paste it in my app, and I get back to work. They have a similar thing, Hero Patterns, which is just as dope. And if you use upload thing, these are going to look familiar because we use almost all of them. Just a bunch of patterns, and you can change the foreground and background color, and then you could just copy the SVG and the CSS. You're done. Download unstyle SVG or use this here. Super, super convenient. So yeah, not surprised Hero Icons is being used. Very useful. Radix UI. This is a really cool one. In fact, one of the creators of Radix tweeted, it was really cool to see Steven, who helped co-create Radix originally, shout out and get hyped on seeing Radix UI being used, specifically their tabs and drop-down components. And the creators jumped in and pointed out that there's actually quite a few more things that they used. Like all of these, We should dig through this package JSON. I am so curious. Not surprised to see Next.js Sentry in here. Love Sentry. Somewhat recently, they started working with me, and I'm very excited to share more about Sentry in the future. They're deep on the ecosystem. They're the right thing to put here. It does not surprise me. I haven't seen Tailwind grid areas before. A plugin to provide Tailwind CSS utilities for named grid areas. Okay, that makes more sense. Oh, I have seen this before. This is really cool. Good shit. Cool to see them not just reinventing everything, but also not just installing every package ever. It seems like they found a really good balance here, which again, this is a great repo for reading through to understand like best practices at scale. They've been very careful about where they do and don't import versus building it themselves. And the results, not too massive a package JSON for a project of this size and scope. They also have a Tailwind container queries plugin. Very, very handy. Node types, which I wish you didn't have to install, but I understand. Vercel Analytics, which not my favorite analytics platform. Y'all know I'm a huge fan of Posthog as well as Plausible, depending on what you're doing. For this case, I'd probably lean Plausible because the users are signed out and the specific behaviors don't matter. But the Vercel Analytics is pretty good too. I get why they use that. Their speed insights are also really good. Makes a lot of sense, especially since they're getting, I'm sure, free access to Vercel's platform. I, as someone who has multiple open source projects that are part of the sponsored open source program by Vercel, know that they're very generous with things like analytics, bandwidth, etc. If you manage to get part of the sponsored program, which honestly isn't that hard. You just hit up their open source email with like, hey, I made this thing, and then they do it. Highly recommend if you haven't done that already. Auto prefixer, which is basically necessary for Tailwind. Class names, which is basically necessary for really using Tailwind. Cross env, which is particularly funny because Node's handling of env is so bad that they had to install a package for it. This is more a Node problem than a Next problem, which makes it funnier. I don't know dedent. ES6 string tag that strips indentation from multi-line strings. Oh? This is the stupidest package I've ever watched. Of course, Josh Goldberg was involved. This is, I think, possibly the dumbest package I've ever fallen in love with this quickly. I need this in my life. I hate that this is as good as it is. And this is so dumb and so useful. 14 kilobytes for something this stupid. And I will eat every single one of them because it makes your code so much more readable. I love this. I hate that I love this as much as I do, but I love this. As well as feed. Oh, it's just RSS generator. I have actually used this before. Cool. Makes sense. What the fuck's GitHub Slugger? I'm having way too many what is this moments. Generate a slug like GitHub does for markdown headings. Okay, that makes sense. Glob also makes sense. Gray matter, for those who don't know, is the thing that lets you grab the little tags in a markdown file on top. So all this is from Matter. Husky, y'all know how I feel about pre-commit hooks. It makes sense with what they're trying to do here, where they want it to be easy to contribute to. And people who aren't technical aren't going to have a particularly great time making changes and then seeing 10 minutes to 2 hours later that the build failed. Having Husky yell at you for it is a nice thing. I get why they did that. Lint stage is a really nice package for only linting things that changed. Next, don't see why they need that. I'm joking, if it wasn't clear. I think they really need that. As well as Next internationalization, as well as Next themes. Again, a bunch of post CSS shit, both for Tailwind and for all their custom stuff. React and React DOM, I don't know why you'd need that either. Rehype for auto link headings. This is, again, just a ton of markdown stuff to make markdown work in real environments, like making headings links, having slugs that work for those links, having the reading time thing appear, all those types of things is all just making markdown more usable. Semver is a package? I guess it's for comparing different like version numbers. Yeah, check if valid, greater than less than. We should use this more. Shiki, which I mentioned before, is fucking awesome. Shiki is almost certainly the best way to do syntax highlighting on a code base. So if you have a doc site or something and you want it to have syntax highlighting, Shiki does really nice syntax highlighting. And you can also do it server side. You don't have to include the bundle on the client side at all. Look at the downloads in Semver. I'm scared to see. This is probably the biggest package I forgot was a thing. I'm going to get so much shit in the comments. I already know. Tailwind, Turbo, TypeScript. Turbo is not a dev dep is weird. I feel like this should be a dev dependency. If it's not, there has to be a reason. But again, like this is why this is so interesting because I wouldn't have put this here. But there's probably a reason why this is here. If I had more time, I would be reading through the Git history to see when this was added and why. Maybe I would at the maintainer on Twitter saying, hey, why did you guys put Turbo in the deps instead of dev deps? Or honestly, what I would do, I would just move it down and see if things break. And I love these types of things. When you're digging through a real code base like this, you can start to glean why these types of decisions were made. They also have virtual file as well as the vfile matter. This is for dealing with all the crazy markdown stuff. Pretty cool overall. Dev deps are hopefully not going to be that much more interesting, but they have handlebars in here, which is definitely interesting. Storybook, which we've mentioned before, I'm not the biggest fan of, as well as the pile of things they have here for it. They also have Jest Stom, React, and Use Event. I will say Storybook's next story is miserable. Everybody I've talked to does not really recommend doing this, so I'm curious how that's working out for them. Not interested in testing it myself, but I'm happy they made it work. This is a good project. Back to the collab guide, because there's a lot of things they call out here still too. Yeah, Rehype and Remark for the market, as I mentioned. Storybook for manual testing and visual regression tests of their React components. Also provides a sandbox environment, which is useful while crafting the components themselves. They use Sentry for reporting the exceptions and monitoring performance and reliability of the app. All makes sense. Interesting. They have a whole breakdown of the structure too. So if you want to dig even deeper than I did here, you have everything you need here. That's pretty cool. They have a config for the locales as expected. Website contents defined within Pages. Initial development usually happens in English, Pages EN. Localized versions of Pages EN are done within Pages locale code, which it seems like none of those exist at this moment in time. I'm curious, actually, if I was to go to nodejs.org, I change the URL to /es, they're not handling the other locales at all at the moment. If I click, yeah, they only show English here. Interesting. It took them 3 years and they don't have other languages on the site yet. I thought that was a priority. Interesting. Curious to see how that goes for them. Also, potential contribution opportunity to contribute localizations. Don't just spam them with PRs, please. I'm very big about that. Y'all know that. But if you're interested and you speak multiple languages and want to help be involved in something as big as the Node site, there's the guide here on how to do that. And I'm sure they're working on, or they have a process for internationalization and localization contributions. Look into that if you're curious, because these are the types of projects you can contribute to meaningfully to have a splash in open source. I do want to look at their components folder. I can't hold myself from doing that. Huh. Yeah, there are a bunch of components here. Interesting, including an MDX component set. And they have the icons. I mentioned before how they did that. Download link, ahref, use detect OS. This sounds like a useful hook. Interesting. Set user OS state, other, bitness 86, architecture ARM. Promise.all, they know better, all settled. And they grab the actual values off and they set the user state. So I didn't check actually, and I'm curious, are they not using Prettier? Oh no, they're using Prettier. Cool, I was gonna say, especially with Tailwind, you gotta use Prettier, but they're using Prettier and Prettier plugin Tailwind. Which again, cool to see such modern stuff being used by Node itself. Blog components. Separate module CSS, which makes sense for blogs. I know I'm the big Tailwind guy, but even Tailwind has a separate library that you can use for formatting blog posts and articles, because applying Tailwind styles to every element in a post sucks, especially when you want them to all look the same. So using something like CSS modules or Tailwind's like plugin for this to apply default styles to H1s, to A tags, and all of these things in a blog post, in this case, a blog header, makes a lot of sense. And they almost certainly should do that. I do hate the stories.tsx files everywhere, but y'all know how I feel about that. I will say for a component library like they have here, not the absolute worst thing, just far from my favorite thing. Blog header, yep. This all makes roughly the sense I would expect it to. Here are the common components. These are going to be the ones that are used the most. Things like a badge component that lets you tag default warning or error badges, which I'm sure is used all over this code base. Maybe not. Maybe they really don't use this at all. Interesting. One of the things I see happening the most in code bases, especially big ones, is the over eagerness to put things in common when they're not that common yet, which results in a bit of what we're seeing here, where the common thing is massive. And we don't know how many of these are actually being used in multiple places or not unless we go look into it. So not a big deal. And for this to be the level I'm roasting at shows just how good and like well-maintained this code base is. I want to be very clear about that. Just a thing to think about. If you're using something in one place and you don't know where else is going to be used yet, just keep it there until it needs to be somewhere else and then move it at that point. Yeah. Small thing. Overall, this is a phenomenal code base, and I really want to emphasize that point. I look at a lot of code bases. I get sent a lot of people's stuff. And it's rare I look at something like, wow, this is not just meeting my bar. This is a good reference to send to others. And I hope y'all take the opportunity to look at this code base too, because the Node team worked really hard to make it. And I do think it's a great example to look at for best practices in modern full stack, and I guess in this case, static site web development. That's all I have to say here though. Huge shout out once again to that team. And until next time, peace nerds.